What's shaking authortube? My name is Cam and welcome to a video where I'm going to tell you about some helpful things that get me moving when I'm writing. And I know what your first thought's going to be. I know what you guys all think of me. You all think,
"Oh, Cam, you haven't put any writing out in ages. You're actually really slow."
Slow? They call you slow? How dare you call me that?
Well, you know what? I got to tell you guys, I've had a really productive writing week. Genuinely, it's been pretty damn good. I'm getting that bag. I'm getting the word bag. I'm feeling motivated. You know what I mean? I'm feeling optimistic. My skin is glowing. And you know what? I'll tell you about how my writing's going and what I am actually writing at the moment, because I'm working on a few different things actually. But I'll leave that for the end of the video, because I know y'all are some impatient bitches. You all have a lot of procrastinating to get back to. So number one thing that helps me with my writing process. You know what? Let's start at the very start. Coming up with an idea.
Bruh.
I'm sure if you dug through my old videos, you would find me saying that me coming up with ideas was spontaneous, like a lot of other authors, and that's fine. A lot of writers come up with most of their ideas in dreams or just as a random epiphany while they're commuting to work or something like that. But something I started doing, I think like last year, that's actually been pretty damn helpful for me and has resulted in some genuinely good ideas is actually sitting down and brainstorming. And yet, I know that sounds daunting. I'm gonna give you some advice. Don't worry, Uncle Cam's got your back. Brainstorming for story ideas is actually a really good practice. I'm sure it's been said by other and more successful people than myself, but sitting down and forcing yourself to try and, come up with some creative ideas on the spot is actually pretty damn good. I guess like training, muscle building, if you had like a creative bicep, really just sitting down and squeezing out a brain nugget. And all you need to do that is one building block, one little Jenga block for you to build off of. And the beauty of it is that can be almost anything. Personally, I like to start with a theme in most cases, but let's say you come up with an idea for a character. You could try to build around that character. For example, if it's a really jealous or selfish character, maybe the story could be something involving a romantic relationship. So there you go, you've got a genre. And you just want to build outward from there. It could also be a place. Maybe you get a funny idea for a magical theme park. Then you could write a story around the magical theme park. Or it could just be a desert. Maybe you want to write a story in the desert for some reason. But like I said, I like to start with a theme, and I'm going to give you an example. This works really well for short stories, or especially anthologies, which generally have a theme connecting all of the short stories. An example of this would be Joe Hill's Strange Weather. Loosely speaking, all of the short stories have something to do with the weather. So get your theme for the story. It could be something more philosophical like isolation, or it could be something more physical like the ocean. So we have a theme. The ocean. Brainstorm about what would be interesting or exciting about the ocean, and there's plenty to that, like stuff like all of the undiscovered species in the ocean, or maybe you want to write a story about someone stuck out in the ocean in the middle of nowhere. So there we go, we have a story about someone stuck in the ocean. How did they get there? And who is it? You see what I mean? It's not by any means an easy thing to do, and it takes a lot of practice, but all you really need is one block, and if you sit down and just dedicate some time to it, you really can come up with something. It's going to be crap a lot of the time. I'll be real with you. The idea might just be complete horseshit. But if you do it enough, I guarantee you're going to come up with a gem. And it might not just be a short story gem. You could come up with a full-length novel gem. And I can say this because that's what happened. I've done this a lot, and some of the story ideas I've had, especially some for a short story series I'm writing at the moment, almost all of them came from this brainstorming activity, and I'm confident that I can say they're pretty good. So, moving on from that, let's say you've got your idea for the story, you've got it outlined, you know what the story is and where you need to go with it. But the problem now is that you're not feeling motivated, you just don't feel like writing. If you're like me, you've probably told yourself, I'm gonna write this many words before work or after work tomorrow, and then it gets to that time and you're like feeling a bit lethargic and you're like, I'll get to it in a bit, just delay it a bit. Never happens. It keeps happening like that over and over. What I've found to be the easiest way to kind of combat that is to set yourself a smaller goal, so to speak, but it's also kind of a trick on yourself.
Alright, brain. You don't like me and I don't like you. but let's just do this and I can get back to killing you with beer. It's a deal.
The idea of sitting down and powering out even just 1,000 words can be pretty daunting at times. That can be an exhausting process. So if you say to yourself instead, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to do some outlining, might just define the characters a bit more, define the environment, maybe do some outlines for the chapters. Outlining has been the best Trojan horse into getting motivated for myself ever. If I know I should be writing, but I just don't feel like it, what I'll do is I'll say to myself, alright, sit down, do some outlining, and then within 5 minutes of doing the outlining, I want to write again. Or even if the idea of doing some outlining is too daunting, just say to yourself, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to read through the outlining I've already done. And sometimes that works just as well. Off the back of that as well, I would honestly say for every writer, you really should be using an outline. And I'm talking about whether you're a planner, a pantser, a planter, whatever, it doesn't matter. Use an outline. It doesn't mean you have to have an outline ready before you start writing. If you prefer to just write on the fly, go nuts. But at a certain point in the story, you're going to be describing characters, and I think it's really important that you are noting down those characteristics in the outline document as you go. That way, later on, if you can't remember the character's eye color or something like that, you've got a document there with all that information. Now, the next one is it's a little bit sneaky. There's a very real possibility. This is going to sound like a really stupid piece of advice because perhaps everyone already does this. I use Microsoft Word, and I'm sure you can do the same thing in Scrivener or whatever, but if you right-click one of the words that you've written down and you go to synonym, you just hover over it, it'll bring up a list of synonyms of similar words. And I use this so much, especially in the first draft, because I know that although in the later drafts we're going to go through and we're going to probably change a lot of words as we go, it is just a super quick way of avoiding too much repetition, because there are going to be times where you're using the same descriptive word a bit too much over and over, and you'll notice that as you're doing it. Really what I'm saying is you can fix that just by right-clicking, going the synonym. Easy. By incorporating the synonym function, you can go from having a sentence like, "The angry man walked angrily to the door with an angry look on his face and yelled, 'Hey, turn down that music,' in an angry voice." You could transform a sentence like that to a sentence like, "The man stormed furiously to the door, his cheeks flushed red with rage, and yelled in a booming voice, 'Hey, turn down that music.'" Now the next one is one I've said quite a few times on this channel already. I've mentioned it in both of my resources for writers or apps for writers. It's an app that you can get on the Play Store or on iOS. It's called Lists for Writers, and these guys don't sponsor me, nothing like that. But depending on where you are, it's going to cost you between $2 and $5, and I honestly feel that this app is just invaluable as a writer. It's incredible. It's honestly a must-have. Now I don't want to be dramatic or anything, but not having this app is pretty much the equivalent of like smashing all your fingers with a hammer. It's basically the same thing. There's thousands and thousands of examples of different descriptive words, different ways of describing an environment, different words for different things, right down to something like different ways of describing a wagon. It's incredible. So all of that is pretty much all of the things that I would say help me with my writing the most. They are my strategies or the things I do that I feel have made me a better writer than I was, a few years ago. There's obviously a whole bunch of other stuff you could do to, make you a better writer, like seeking out further education in creative writing. Oh, one last tip. If everything else fails, you could just brood. Just sit there and brood. That's what writers do. Now, as promised, for those who stuck around, those who want to hear about where my writing is right now, what I'm writing, like I said, I've been super productive this week. Now, I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but not only have I done more writing in the last couple of weeks than I have in perhaps years, but I've felt passionate about writing again, which is something I didn't even know I'd lost for a while there. I still enjoyed writing when I sat down to do it, but I didn't feel like the fire for it, and I've had it again, and it just feels amazing. It's honestly, again, not to be dramatic, but it is having an improvement on a whole lot of other aspects of my life, at least at the moment as well. I'm approaching everything else with a better mood because I'm feeling more fulfilled. I'm feeling more driven. I feel like I'm moving towards my life goal more than I have been before, where I've been in this rut. But as you know, I'm working on a full-length novel psychological horror. I reworked a ton of the chapters, the chapter outlines. I just completely changed them, moved them around, and I think it's a huge improvement. Off the cuff of that, I did a ton of work on it, and I'm getting really damn close to finishing a first draft, I think. But then another really exciting thing is that just randomly one day, I had the idea of a short story, and I kind of sat down, I wrote out the outline for it just to make sure I didn't forget it. And then a bit of a theme popped up in my mind, and I was like, that would make a pretty good anthology of short stories. So I did the thing I mentioned before where I was like, I have a couple of hours to spare, I'll just sit down and maybe try some brainstorming, and the stories were just popping out. In the space of like 2 to 3 days, I just went from having a random idea for a pretty cool short story to having like 5 or 6 short stories completely planned and outlined and put together for this anthology. Not written, but planned and outlined. And I've been so productive on that anthology at the moment that I think it's a very real likelihood that one's going to be finished pretty damn soon, and definitely finished before the psychological horror novel. I'll talk more about the anthology as time goes on, but as of right now, I just want to keep it a bit secretive until I've done more work on it. But what I will tell you is that the genre of them ranges between more psychological horror to perhaps more psychological thriller. This one definitely isn't as horror as the novel I'm writing, it's definitely more thriller. Anyway, that's it. If you watched the whole video, thank you very much. I hope those tips I mentioned help with your writing. Like I said, give the brainstorming a try, give it some practice, flex those creative muscles. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Catch ya.
She's got class and style, street knowledge by the pound, yeah. Never act